Menglong was passed away 3 hours before falling. The morning was quiet, almost unnaturally so. Beijing's streets shimmered under the first hesitant rays of sun, yet somewhere in the heart of the city, the air carried a weight that no one could name. Inside a quiet apartment, a stillness lingered where Menglong had once lived, breathed, laughed, and dreamed. The world had known him as a star, a performer, a soul captured in light and motion, but it had never truly known him. And now, in the cruelest twist of fate, the truth emerged. Menglong had passed away 3 hours before the fall that shocked millions. The news hit like a thunderclap. Social media erupted, screens lighting up with disbelief. Fans, colleagues, and even casual viewers struggled to comprehend the revelation. How could it be? The fall, the accident that had been broadcast, reported, feared, had happened only hours after his death? How could the body, the stage, the world itself betray the truth so tragically, so cruelly? Yet for those who knew him, the pieces began to fall into a pattern darker, stranger, and more poignant than anyone could have imagined. Menglong's final hours were now under scrutiny, pieced together through eyewitness accounts, recordings, and the fragments of his own final messages. He had been alone in the early evening, his apartment quiet except for the faint hum of city life beyond the window. He had moved with deliberate calm, tending to simple routines, writing notes, leaving small tokens for those he loved. Everything about him suggested peace, not turmoil, a man who understood the fragility of his own existence and had chosen to embrace it quietly. 3 hours later, the incident occurred, the fall that would later dominate headlines, replayed in slow-motion clips, analyzed endlessly by experts and fans alike. But in truth, Menglong had already left this world. His body had ceased to function, but in those final hours, his presence lingered as if the universe itself had conspired to create one last moment of suspense, a cruel cinematic echo of the life he had just departed. The scene of the fall was haunting. Emergency responders described the area as eerily calm, the surroundings untouched by chaos, yet shadowed by tragedy. Windows reflected the pale light of early night, and onlookers whispered, their voices trembling with awe and fear. The realization that he had already passed before the fall reframed everything. It was no accident, no desperate act. It was a final stage, an unintentional performance where reality itself had played the cruelest trick. Investigators later reviewed CCTV footage, piecing together a timeline that confirmed the unimaginable. At 8:45 p.m., Menglong had been seen standing by his window, gazing out at the city lights with a kind of solemn serenity. His movements were calm, almost ritualistic, a man quietly observing the world he was about to leave, connecting with its beauty one last time. By 8:50 p.m., he had passed, his breath ceasing as though the city itself had paused to honor him. Then, 3 hours later, the fall occurred, a haunting echo that no one could explain, yet which seemed almost poetic in its tragic symmetry. The public reaction was immediate and intense. Fans flooded memorials, leaving candles, letters, and flowers, their grief magnified by the surreal timing of his departure. Social media became a cathedral of emotion, with hashtags trending worldwide. Hashtag Menglong forever. Hashtag final hours. Hashtag 3 hours before fate. People shared personal stories, recounting how his performances had touched their lives, how his voice had soothed them in times of despair, how his artistry had inspired courage and hope. But beyond the shock and grief, there was an even deeper layer of emotional complexity. The revelation forced the world to confront the nature of existence, mortality, and fate itself. How could someone leave the world hours before a fall that seemed inevitable? How could timing be so cruel and yet so precise? And most importantly, how could one man, so luminous in life, command such a haunting, final moment even in death? Menglong's family spoke cautiously, choosing their words with the weight of history pressing on them. He left us peacefully, they said, voice trembling but dignified. His last hours were calm, reflective, filled with the world had been shaken before, But nothing prepared anyone for the revelation of the timing. Menglong had passed away 3 hours before the fall that had terrified the nation, shocked fans, and dominated headlines. The news struck with the weight of disbelief, bending perception and twisting reality into something both tragic and almost miraculous. People could not reconcile the image of his body in the later accident with the knowledge that life had already quietly departed from him. It was as though the universe had conspired to create a final, silent performance, a last act where reality itself became a haunting stage. In those final hours, Menglong's apartment was a sanctuary of stillness. Every object, every movement, carried weight. The air was heavy with anticipation, though no one knew it yet. There was no chaos, no panic, no cinematic drama, only the quiet rhythm of a man completing the final lines of his own story. He moved deliberately, tending to the small routines that had always grounded him, setting a cup of tea by the window, brushing a stray strand of hair from his forehead, tracing the edges of his notebook with fingers that had written countless lines of dialogue, poetry, and song. These movements were ordinary, yet in retrospect, each was infused with meaning, a choreography of farewell known only to him. No one witnessed these hours directly, but the fragments recovered afterward painted a portrait of profound humanity. Voice recordings, unsent messages, and scattered notes revealed him speaking gently to those he loved, not in public, not for applause, but for hearts he would never again touch. "If you are hearing this," one recording began, voice soft yet commanding attention, "then understand that my departure is calm. I have not rushed, nor suffered at that moment. I leave as one who has walked every corridor of his life fully, who has felt every joy and sorrow, and who has carried love in silence." The beauty of those last hours was not in spectacle, but in subtlety. Menglong could be seen pausing at the window, gazing at the city lights below, eyes flickering with reflection. Each light seemed to call out to him, every flicker a reminder of lives intersecting with his own. He spoke aloud in these moments, his voice barely more than a whisper, yet each word echoed far beyond the walls of his apartment. He thanked friends who had supported him silently, expressed love for fans who had never wavered, and acknowledged the people who had shaped his journey, knowingly or not. "Every heart that touched mine," he said, "every smile, every word, every simple kindness has been my anchor. And now I must leave, not in fear, but in gratitude." 3 hours passed in this private universe. Time itself seemed suspended, stretching moments into eternity. Observers, reconstructing his movements afterward, noted how meticulously he arranged small personal items, letters, photographs, little mementos, as though leaving invisible threads for those who would later mourn him. Nothing was left to chance. Every gesture carried intentionality, a message of closure wrapped in ordinary acts. In one note, he simply wrote, "Remember me in sunlight, in laughter, in moments of courage." It was a message of guidance, a roadmap for how to grieve without succumbing to despair, a subtle manifesto of hope. At 8:50 p.m., Menglong passed. The recordings captured the faintest exhale, a moment of finality so delicate it might have been missed entirely if not for the equipment that recorded the room's ambient sounds. There was no struggle, no dramatic collapse, only serenity, as though the world had bowed in silence to his departure. And then, 3 hours later, the fall occurred. At first, the public assumed causality, but the forensic timelines revealed a shocking truth. The body had already left life's grasp. The 3 hours stretched like a silent eternity, a bridge between existence and legend, between life's last moments and the world's perception of catastrophe. Inside his apartment, time seemed suspended. Every breath, every blink, every subtle movement was imbued with intention, though no one outside could know it. Menglong had created a universe of farewell in that room, quiet, deliberate, sacred. He moved slowly to the table where his phone lay, the device that would later become a vessel of truth for the world. Fingers trembling slightly, he scrolled through messages, recordings, and unsent drafts, pausing over each as though speaking silently to those who would someday hear them. "These words," he whispered, voice low and fragile, "are for those who saw me, those who never saw me, and those who understood in silence. Carry them forward." Among the notes was a recording he had made for fans, though never sent. "Do not mourn me," he said softly, yet with gravity. "Do not allow sorrow to define what we shared. Remember the laughter, the music, the fleeting moments that made life bright. My passing is quiet, but my love is not." His voice carried warmth and fragility simultaneously, the duality of someone both exhausted and alive with compassion. Each inflection, each pause, each breath became a brushstroke, painting the portrait of a man who had given everything to the world, yet reserved the deepest truths for the few who would ever truly know. He then turned to his notebook, tracing letters, unfinished poems, and reflections. Some lines were cryptic, others intimate. One read, "Even in absence, presence persists. Even in silence, my voice remains. If you hear me now, it is because I never truly left." Another, "I hope you find me in the sun, the wind, the fleeting moments that make you smile. I have loved, and I am loved. Remember that." The surreal calm of the apartment contrasted sharply with what the world would later perceive as the fall. Outside, the city carried on unaware, lights twinkling, cars humming, distant voices echoing, life continuing oblivious to the quiet drama within one room. And yet, within those walls, Menglong's final moments were saturated with emotion, reflection, and intentionality. There was no panic, no despair, only the profound serenity of someone who had faced the edges of existence with clarity and acceptance. Then came a message he recorded to his closest friends. It was fragmented, halting, each word chosen with care. "I am at peace," he said. "Do not imagine pain. Do not carry guilt. I leave as I wish to be remembered, quietly, thoughtfully, with gratitude, and with love for everyone who has walked beside me. This is not the end, but a moment of transformation. I am still here, in every heart that remembers me." The words were a paradox, final, yet eternal, fragile, yet enduring. The 3 hours passed with almost imperceptible milestones. He drank tea, traced objects on the desk, paused to gaze at city lights, whispered names of friends and family, and even recited lines of poetry from memory. Each gesture became a testament, an act of love and closure. When he finally rested, the room seemed to exhale with him, the weight of his presence settling into stillness, preparing the world for the shocking irony that would follow. The fall, 3 hours later, which the universe allowed to occur without claiming him, as if even fate respected the dignity of his departure. The discovery of his phone afterward revealed the richness of these hours. Voice notes, photos, and texts allowed the world to reconstruct the intimacy of his farewell. Fans listened with rapt attention, tears streaming, hearts aching as they heard the depth of his love, the courage of his acceptance, and the serene gravity of his last acts. Each note was a bridge, connecting the public to a man who had previously seemed untouchable in his brilliance, now achingly human in his final expressions. One particular recording became emblematic of the 3-hour mystery. Menglong spoke directly to the camera, a faint smile brushing his lips. "If you are seeing me now," he said, "know that my final act